You keep repeating the same pattern, the same relationships, the same anxiety, the same reaction you swore you'd never have again, and nothing you do seems to break it. What if that pattern was never yours to begin with? Generational trauma is real, and science, specifically epigenetics, now shows us that trauma can be inherited. It can be passed down through your biology, not just through your family stories. So today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain what's actually happening in your nervous system. I'm going to show you the science in a way that actually makes sense. And I'll be giving you 7 questions that'll help you figure out, is this pattern yours or was it handed to you? If you've seen my video on subconscious mind reprogramming, you probably saw the iceberg reference before. But today we're going to go deeper, past the subconscious down to the bottom, the unconscious part. The part that's been running quietly since maybe before you had words for any of it. And here's what most people don't know. Some of what's running down there may not have started with you. It may have been shaped by the emotional environment and survival patterns passed through your family long before you understood what was happening. Researchers sometimes call this inherited or intergenerational trauma, patterns of fear, stress, and emotional survival that can echo through generations and definitely influence the nervous system. During my training as a FasterEFT practitioner, we talked about this as an ancestral problem. It's emotional programs already influencing your nervous system long before you had a conscious choice in the matter. And if that's true, maybe some of what you've blamed yourself for was never fully yours to begin with. And here's the thing, it doesn't feel inherited. It feels really very personal. It feels like when you say, this is just how I am, right? Because to you, there's no other explanation for it. You must have done something wrong. That's how we internalize these feelings. And that reminds me of Kay. She was a client I worked with last year. Now, Kay had a pattern of staying in relationships that weren't good for her, men who didn't treat her well. And when I asked her why she stayed, she said, because she felt like being alone was worse. When I started asking questions, we uncovered where that belief came from. See, Kay remembered her grandmother. Her, her grandmother had lost her husband very young. She raised her children on her own. And by most measures, she did very well. She was strong, she was capable, she was resilient. But Kay, looking through a little girl's eyes, didn't see the strength. She saw hard. She saw alone. She saw a woman who had to carry the weight of the world all by herself. And right then, in that moment, in Kay's little girl nervous system, a survival program got coded. It sounded like this: whatever you do, don't end up like grandma. Her grandmother wasn't traumatized, she was thriving. But little Kay's perception of her grandmother's life was a shock to her system. She decided unconsciously that being alone was a threat to her survival. So, how does a perception like Kay's turn into a physical pattern that runs your life for decades? And Kay's not alone in this, and neither are you if this is something that you're experiencing. And this is where the science comes in. So, how does a pattern travel from one generation to the next without anyone saying a word? And that's where epigenetics comes in. And I know that word can sound intimidating, at least it did to me when I first learned about it. So, I'm going to try and simplify it for you. This is the way I understood it. Let's use the analogy that your DNA is like a radio station. It's the broadcast. It's the music that's playing. It's the information you were born with. And you really can't change the station. But epigenetics, that's the volume knob. It doesn't change the song, it changes how loud it plays. Now, epi, part of epigenetics, epi means above. So epigenetics is the layer on top of your genes. It It doesn't rewrite your DNA, it just decides which genes get turned all the way up to a 10 and which ones get turned all the way down to a 0. When Kay's nervous system watched her grandmother and coded that survival program, it's not safe to be alone, it was like her system reached over, grabbed the volume knob on fear, and cranked it up to a 10. Her body, her mind decided that fear was necessary for survival. And here's the part that I didn't even realize. The volume setting that volume setting can be passed down. In 2013, researchers at Emory University did a study with mice. They exposed male mice to a scent similar to cherry blossoms, and at the same time, they gave them a small foot shock. And over time, the mice learned to fear that scent. So, what their mind did is it linked the smell of cherry blossoms to pain. But then what's really interesting, researchers looked at the grandchildren of those mice. These mice had never been shocked. They'd never even been exposed to the scent. But the moment they smelled it, their hearts raced and they panicked. The volume on that specific fear had been turned up to a 10 in the grandfather, and the grandchildren were born with the volume already there. So you weren't there for the original shock. You didn't have, or you didn't live through your grandmother's struggle. But if your nervous system coded a survival signal from watching it, you might be the one living with that internal noise today. You didn't choose the volume. You were just born into a room where the music was already playing way too loud. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but how did that volume knob get turned up for me? I wasn't a mouse in a lab. And this is where things get really interesting. Your brain has something called mirror neurons. Think of them as your brain's copy and paste buttons. When you were a child, your brain was like a sponge. You didn't just listen to what your parents said, you mirrored how they felt. If your mother or grandmother was constantly in a high state of alert, even if she was being strong, even if she was doing a great job of it, your mirror neurons picked up on that underlying frequency. And researchers found something remarkable when studying this in animals. What they did is they looked at two types of mothers, one that was very nurturing and attentive with her young, and one that was present but distant, not giving them much engagement at all. What happened was that the offspring raised by the nurturing mother grew up relaxed. Their volume knob on stress was turned way down. The offspring raised by the distant mother, they grew up anxious. Their stress volume was cranked to a 10. But when they took an offspring from that distant mother and let the nurturing mother raise it, that volume knob turned down. The animal's biology actually changed because of the environment and the mirroring it experienced with a new mother. Now, just sit with that for a second. An emotionally distant mother, not a cruel mother, not an abusive mother, just just a mother who was there but not fully there, was enough to turn a stress response all the way up to a 10. And while these were animal studies, researchers tend to believe that the same mechanisms are at work in humans. So if you grew up with a mother who was physically present but emotionally elsewhere, maybe she was surviving her own grief, her own anxiety. She was doing the best that she could. And sometimes for her, that meant to sit in silence. But just notice what comes up for you right now. See, Kay wasn't born defective. She just had her copy and paste buttons active while watching her grandmother, who, while strong, was living a life that looked like a survival struggle through the eyes of a child. Kay's mirror neurons saw or linked alone with hard, and they reached over and turned her volume knob on fear of being alone all the way up to keep her safe. Now, this wasn't her grandmother's fault by any means. It wasn't Kay's fault either. It was just two nervous systems doing exactly what they were designed to do, survive. Now, if you think about that, this is where it gets really interesting because for a long time, we've been told our health, our personality, and even our struggles are hardwired into our DNA. And we've been told it's just bad luck or bad genes. But the science of epigenetics is telling us something completely different, which I find very fascinating. Research suggests that only about 10 to 20% of our health issues and life patterns are actually caused by our genetic code. That means that 80 to 90% of what you're dealing with right now, maybe the anxiety, the weight, the relationship patterns, the way you feel about money, could be epigenetic. Now, why could that be the best news you've heard all day? Because if something is genetic, it feels like it's a life sentence. You're stuck with it. But if it's epigenetic, that means it's just a volume knob that was turned up by a past experience. And if it was turned up, logically, it can be turned back down. You aren't stuck with the volume 10 setting of your mother's anxiety or your grandmother's grief. You have the ability to reach in and change that setting. And here's another little caveat to that. If you don't change the pattern, you don't just carry it, you recycle it with your children, with your partner, with anybody that's close to you. You become the one turning their volume knob up the same way yours was turned up. But when you heal that, you stop the cycle. You become the generation where it ends. So let me bring this full circle. If 80 to 90% of what you're struggling with isn't locked into your DNA, if it's just a volume setting that got turned up by someone else's experience, then you don't have to live with the noise forever. So, how do you heal generational trauma? When we use FasterEFT, we aren't just talking about your problem. We work with your nervous system to change the emotional charge of the memories that turned that volume knob up in the first place. And that's called memory reconsolidation. And all that means is we're going back to the radio station and turning the volume 10 fear back down to a zero. When you change the emotional data in your mind, your body stops receiving the survival signal. And when the signal stops, the volume knob moves. The epigenetic expression changes. You are literally breaking generational cycles at a nervous system level. Before we can change the setting, we have to know which knob we're turning. We have to figure out, is this pattern really yours or was it handed to you? Now I want to give you a few questions and just notice what comes up. That's usually the honest answer. I always say trust your subconscious. So if you need to pause the video right now, go grab a piece of paper and a pencil or something to write with, and write these questions down. And as I read off each question, you can pause the video and answer those questions. So here's question one. Is there a pattern in your life that you keep trying to change, but it keeps coming back no matter what you do? Question two, where else have you seen this kind of pattern show up in your own life or maybe in somebody else's? Question three, when you think about that pattern right now, where do you feel it in your body? Do you feel that sensation in your chest, in your stomach, in your throat? Just notice where that feeling is. Now, question four, on a scale of 0 to 10, where 0 is completely calm and 10 is overwhelming, what number is that feeling right now as you think about that pattern? Question five, now ask yourself, if that feeling had a voice, whose voice would it be? Question six, if that voice had a message, what would that message be? And question seven, if you found out that pattern was never yours to begin with, it was just a volume knob turned up by someone else's survival, would you be willing to turn it down? Now, the purpose of these questions isn't to find the right answer, it's to surface what's already running underneath your awareness, because you can't change a pattern that you can't see. Now, if any of this hit home for you, if you felt something shift, or if those questions surfaced something you've been carrying for a long time, you don't have to figure it out alone. I offer a free consultation, usually lasts anywhere from 30 to 60 minutes, where we can look at what came up for you and start turning that volume knob down together. There's no pressure, no commitment, just a conversation. You learn from me and I learn from you. So I'll put the link below. Just pick a time that works for you. And if you're not ready for that yet, that's okay too. Just notice what came up. That awareness alone is the beginning of breaking generational cycles. And if you want more information like this, consider subscribing. I put out a new video every week, and I'll see you in the next one.